They are an engineering marvel, built thousands of years ago with no machines, no modern technology, and no room for error. You've probably heard the wild theories: aliens, time travelers, or lost ancient technology. But what if the real story is even more incredible? How did workers move multi-ton stones and align massive structures with such precision? We're breaking it all down, brick by brick, on today's episode of the Infographics Show, explaining how the Egyptian pyramids were actually built. Despite all the speculation surrounding their origins, the construction of the pyramids can be explained through a mix of proven science and historical accounts of how and why they were built. So, let's start there. Why did ancient Egyptian pharaohs feel the need to build gigantic triangular structures in the middle of the desert? Well, to use a modern term, they were flexing. You know how rich YouTubers will buy the biggest, most expensive homes they can find and show them off to their audience. Well, the pharaohs did the same thing, except they had the pyramids built from the ground up. That was the other key difference. The pyramids weren't for living in. They were for, well, the opposite. Instead of being a way to show off their wealth and status while they were alive, pharaohs wanted to leave this world with a reminder of just how powerful they were. They wanted to ensure that even long after they were gone, no one would ever question who was top dog. Not every ruler of ancient Egypt was lucky enough to be remembered as one of history's biggest alphas. In fact, only 3 kings earned the honor of a Giza pyramid. The oldest of these royal tombs was built for Pharaoh Khufu, the second king of the 4th dynasty. His tomb, referred to as the Great Pyramid, started construction around 2550 BC and is also the biggest of the 3, but historians assure us that he wasn't compensating for anything. It's estimated to consist of over 2 million individual stone blocks, each one weighing between 2.5 to 15 tons on average. The middle pyramid was constructed around 2520 BC to house the remains of Khufu's son, Pharaoh Khufu, the 4th king of the 4th dynasty. His burial grounds also included a monument of a being with the body of a lion and the head of the pharaoh himself, the Sphinx. The last to be built was the pyramid of Pharaoh Menkaure, son of Khufu and 5th king of the 4th dynasty. Menkaure's pyramid might be the smallest of the main 3, but it came with an entire complex to temples connected by a causeway, plus 3 smaller pyramids likely built for his queens. Not to fixate too much on comparing sizes, but Khufu's pyramid is just over 480 feet 146 meters tall. Khufu's pyramid was originally around 10 feet shorter at just over 470 feet 143 meters. Meanwhile, Menkaure's measures in at 215 feet 65.5 meters tall. Historians have long debated what the pyramids were actually meant to represent. Surely a big mausoleum works just as well to commemorate a dead pharaoh. So, why build a pyramid, as well as memorializing the life and status of 3 of Egypt's kings? It's thought that the shape of these funerary sites was believed to function as a stairway for the pharaoh's their soul to reach the heavens. There's also long been a fringe archaeological theory that the 3 main pyramids in the Giza complex were intentionally built to mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt. While that's been widely debunked, we'll get more into the exact alignment of the pyramids a little later. There might be no evidence that they were built to mimic the stars, but somehow all 4 faces are pointing north, south, east, and west. As to why they were built, it's simple. They're tombs for 3 dead, rich rulers. But when we take a closer look at exactly how the pyramids were constructed, and who actually built them, that's where things get real interesting. Let's start with the who. The reductive answer often given is that slaves were the ones who built the pyramids. It's not hard to see how someone could preemptively jump to a conclusion like that. The pharaohs did own slaves, and constructing the pyramids would have required a significantly sized labor force. But slave labor may not have been responsible for the creation of the pyramids. It's still widely debated, and given the scarcity of ancient records, there's actually plenty of evidence to suggest the pyramids were constructed by the hands of paid workers. These were highly organized crews, provided with food, shelter, and medical care as they carried out this massive undertaking in rotating shifts. The pyramids weren't built as solitary monuments to house dead pharaohs. They were large parts of complexes that spanned several acres of land, including other buildings like temples, chapels, as well as other tombs and funerary sites. It's for that reason that archaeologists aren't just concerned with unearthing what's inside or under the pyramids themselves, but what we can learn about them from findings made around these structures. There's been evidence uncovered on some digs that seem to suggest the workers responsible for the task of building the pyramids lived in a nearby temporary city. Around 17 acres 6.9 hectares of sprawling camps where this highly organized community would have stayed. Remains of bakeries and small animal bones seem to indicate that they were well fed after their hard work of shifting heavy blocks of stone, and we have more on how they managed that coming up. Some of the earliest historical accounts of the construction of the pyramids actually come from the writings of ancient Greek historians, like Herodotus. According to him, the Great Pyramid, that's Pharaoh Khufu's afterlife bachelor pad, took around 20 years to be completed. It required the labor of around 100,000 workers to put the whole monument together, each employed for 3 months out of the year. That seems like a pretty realistic figure. We're working with the assumption that these weren't just poorly treated and malnourished slaves, but were actually hardened and physically able agricultural workers. It's possible that building the pyramids might even have been something of a second job for this workforce. Some of them might have also been primarily farming during harvest seasons and then working on the pyramids during the times of year when fewer hands were needed on the fields. Despite 100,000 men all built for labor, it still took 20 years to build the Great Pyramid. What if there were even fewer workers, and they still managed to complete the project in the same amount of time? By the late 20th century, archaeologists had found evidence that a smaller workforce might well have been inhabiting the temporary sites surrounding the pyramid. It's been suggested that they weren't working on construction on any seasonal basis, but were permanently assigned to the pyramids. It's thought that as few as 20,000 workers were given the task, along with the support of other personnel like priests, bakers, and other food vendors keeping them all fed. There were also physicians to treat any potential illness or injuries that might have occurred while working on the pyramid site. It's also thought that other communities from across Egypt might have contributed additional workers to assist with the building, along with delivering food and other essentials. In a way, the project to immortalize their rulers through these monuments became a nationwide effort for everyone in Egypt. According to records found written in ancient papyri, among those assisting those building the pyramids were boatmen. They would use the Nile and a network of artificial waterways to transport building materials, as well as bringing livestock up from farms near the Nile Delta in order to sustain the workers. So, that's our labor force, a collective of several thousand builders. Now, let's check out what they were working with. Even among actual scientists, engineers, and archaeologists, there's still a lot of speculation about how exactly the pyramids were built. But that's where looking at the materials and tools used by the ancient Egyptians can shed a lot of light on those unanswered questions. In particular, the Egyptians had developed copper tools like chisels, saws, and even drills that could all have been used to cut stone. Not all types of stone, though in fact, not even all the types of stone used while constructing the pyramids. Take the granite that's used for the walls of the pharaoh's burial chamber, for example. Granite, being a much harder stone, would have made it tough to work with, but something like limestone would have been easier to cut through and shape. Most of the stone used in the Giza pyramids was quarried nearby, on the Giza plateau, and this is what was used to make the huge blocks that formed the outer casing of the pyramid. Not all of the limestone was locally sourced. Some of it had to be brought across the Nile from Tura, and this is where the boatmen came in. The building materials they brought in included limestone from the Tura quarries, timber from Lebanon, and plenty of copper cutting tools from the Sinai Peninsula. The boatmen were also responsible for bringing in the granite that cased the rooms inside the pyramids, the harder stone being sourced from Aswan. They'd even time the transportation of these essential materials around the flooding season to avoid any potential hiccups that could delay construction. These materials, in particular the limestone, would be chiseled into blocks by stonemasons using copper tools at the quarries, then taken over to the build site to be added to the pyramid. There are actually marks left on some of the blocks by these quarry workers, which give the names of specific work gangs that helped in construction, almost like a signature or a graffiti tag. There were likely a number of crews who worked part-time to assist the stonemasons and other more skilled workers who carved the stone all year round. So, we now know who was on the ground building the pyramids and where they got their building materials from. So, what did the actual construction process look like? Just like with any building, the first phase is to choose a suitable spot. Giza wasn't just an area the pharaohs liked the look of, or pointed to randomly on a map. It was specifically chosen as the most suitable site for the Great Pyramid and the two subsequent ones. There were special criteria that the location needed to have. In particular, it had to be on the western side of the Nile. Why? Because that's the side the sun set, and the ancient Egyptians believed that wherever the sun set was the gateway to the afterlife. The threat of floods was another factor that determined where the pyramids were situated. In order to avoid the danger of flooding, the pyramids needed to be on higher ground, but they couldn't be too far from the Nile either, given the crucial role the river played in allowing materials to be transported to the building site. Distance was also an important factor to the pharaohs themselves. Since construction of their burial chambers was underway while they were alive, the pyramids couldn't be built too far from their palaces. After all, no king wants a long commute just to inspect the site of his own tomb. That site would also need to be strong enough to support the weight of the pyramids too. Remember, there were over 2 million blocks making up the Great Pyramid. Building it on nothing but sand would make the structure dangerously unsafe. Luckily, Giza's desert plateau had a firm rock base that was more than capable of holding the enormous weight that was soon to be built on top of it. But it wasn't just a case of picking a good spot and getting started. The site first needed to be adequately prepped. Next up, Phase 2, getting the site ready for building. In order to first prepare the foundations, workers would have had to tirelessly remove the loose sand from the rock, making sure the pyramid had a perfectly flat base as its foundation. One of the tools the ancient Egyptians definitely didn't have handy were spirit levels. So how could they ensure the rock foundations were flat? One of the methods they could have employed to determine this would have been to first build a basic mud wall low down, all around the base, and then cut channels all across the surface, as a big grid. Then, after filling all the channels with water and marking the level that the water reached, they could then drain the water out and start cutting down to that level. Any protruding or uneven rock would be chiseled away, and depressions in the rock could be filled with excess stone. That would leave a near enough perfectly flat, level surface for a pyramid. But you can't just slap a pyramid on any leveled out plot of land, especially when each triangular side of the structure would need to face a cardinal point, the 4 main points of a compass. And wouldn't you know it, the ancient Egyptians didn't have any of those handy either, but they still managed to make it work. It's likely that someone with knowledge of astronomy could have helped determine true north, possibly using specific stars in the northern sky, and then determining the other 3 directions based on that. By tracking the rising and setting of a specific star against an artificial horizon, Egyptian astronomers could establish a north-south line. Using simple tools to draw right angles, they could then determine east and west, each exactly 90 degrees from north and south. Alternatively, they may have used the old needle on a leaf trick. This is where you float a magnetized needle on water to find a basic axis, then use the sun's position to determine true north. With the foundation flattened and in a perfect square, with each side of equal length, the third phase of constructing the pyramid could begin. The exact methods the ancient Egyptians used for raising the huge heavy bricks without the aid of modern construction equipment might well be the single most hotly debated mystery of the pyramids' construction. After all, these workers moved huge quantities of stone in order to construct these monuments to their pharaohs, but that doesn't mean they had help from aliens. One of the more plausible explanations is that the workers created a sloping embankment of brick earth and sand that they then increased in height and length as the pyramid rose, essentially creating a gradual incline that could be swept away when they were done. Granite and limestone blocks were likely hauled up embankments using sledges or rollers, a method we know was used, thanks to tomb paintings that show workers transporting heavy loads this way. Just as tomb art reveals burial customs and rituals, it also shows laborers moving massive statues on sledges, a technique easily applied to pyramid construction. To make the job easier, they likely wetted the ground with water or mud, reducing friction and making it possible to drag the enormous stones. Of course, that would mean that this ramp structure would have to be as big as the pyramid itself in order for workers to reach the topmost levels. But no trace of any such structure has ever been found at any archaeological digs near any of the pyramids. They would have had to reach way out into the desert, though it's been suggested that these exterior ramps could also have spiraled around each pyramid. They would then be dismantled once the pyramid was complete, similarly to how modern construction workers use scaffolding. Herodotus supposedly visited ancient Egypt and got to witness part of the construction of the pyramids. He tells of levers being used to raise blocks from one level to the next, gradually piling more and more, going higher and higher. Pulleys weren't invented until the 12th dynasty around 1991 BC, long after the pyramids were already standing. So, we can rule that out. But there's no way that the construction of the pyramids was haphazard, accidental, or came as the result of external or otherworldly forces. While nobody has exactly found a blueprint or plan for the construction of the pyramids, there's little doubt that the project would have been carefully and meticulously planned, with the most accurate measurements possible. The inner burial chamber and any internal passages would have been constructed first, using granite, then the inner pyramid or on it using the limestone from the desert plateau. Then the finely cut limestone from the stonemasons in Tura used to form the outer pyramid. There's probably another question bugging you, and that's why 3. If the ancient Egyptians were set on putting so much work and meticulous craft into preserving the memory of their pharaohs, why stop at just 3 pyramids? Well, they didn't. You see, pyramid construction hit its peak between the 4th and 6th dynasties, with smaller pyramids than the big 3 at Giza being constructed for more than 1,000 years. The problem was, while they were certainly an eye-catching monument to a deceased ruler, that also made them a target for grave robbers. Given the riches that pharaohs were famously buried with, it'd be a pretty easy score for some opportunistic thieves to head to where a dead king was buried and make off with all his stuff. After all, no need to search around in the ground to find where he's buried. Just head for the nearest pyramid. While a number of mummified remains have been uncovered by modern archaeologists, it's clear that the pyramids didn't actually provide any protection for the bodies of dead pharaohs. It's for that reason that many later kings of Egypt were instead buried in hidden tombs, some that were cut into cliffs, to avoid being plundered. Although they might not have protected ancient Egypt's dead from the living, the existence of the pyramids, especially the big 3 in Giza, has allowed these pharaohs to achieve as close to immortality as is humanly possible. Their names and histories have been preserved and kept alive for thousands of years up to the present day, and that's in no small part thanks to the ingenuity of the workers who built the pyramids. It's hard to overstate just how advanced these monuments were. Even by modern construction standards, few things compare to thousands of workers using every bit of knowledge they had to stack massive stones into towering structures. The sides of the Great Pyramid are almost perfectly aligned, its northernmost side facing nearly directly towards true north, only out by the tiniest fraction of a single degree. To be able to achieve that level of accuracy in ancient times didn't require extraterrestrial help or mystery technology. It took detailed planning, precise execution, and unfaltering effort. The result is structures that are still considered to be wonders, even after thousands of years. And if you thought the pyramids were impressive, just wait, there's so much more to ancient Egypt than they ever taught you. Watch Unbelievable.